and we move on and embrace the coming summer.
Yes, welcome on my behalf as well. Great to have you here for some final time.
So let's get going. I guess this pretty much visually shows that we have been through together already 5 lectures, and now we're going to today talk about meta skills and looking back at what has happened. But before going there, let's go back to an important thing that happened last lecture. So last lecture, and if you weren't there, this is to remind you, I had this slide. And this was part of the second half. And this caused some, how should I put it? Anyway, this caused people to comment, let's put it this way, especially this quotation over here. So, of course, I want to apologize for a few things, and I'm coming back to that. But still, as a teacher, I want to point out that this is a really good thing to talk about, especially in a course like this, where we have talked so much about diverse lenses and perspectives and sensitivity and the importance of language and meanings. Nevertheless, just about that slide, first of all, clarification from my part, the way I explained the slide last time and want to really emphasize. So that was a quote, and that was from another person. So originally the reason I had the slide was there that I told you that, I had a person I coached many years ago, and that's how they described design and in the context of the design coaching. So just to make sure that everybody understood, that's not my opinion, that's not my words, but that was a quotation. And second, of course, begs the question, so why did I use that quote? What was my intention with it? And if you remember from last time, the theme was overcoming different people's attitudes, different prejudice, and different kind of resistance. And my intention was to just drop in that quote, just to show that what kind of a resistance that people have when it comes to facilitating or changing, and in this case, teaching kind of strategic design to people. So these kind of things are going to pop up, whether we want it or not. And not all of the things that we're going to face are pleasant or correct or even appropriate. So that was the intention behind it. Whether I was successful in it, I wasn't, obviously, because people flagged this. People got concerned. People felt, a few of you felt that it was kind of non-inclusive, and that wasn't mine. So I do apologize. For some of you, I crossed the line by using that quotation, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not seeing the points that you made about it. And also, I want to thank you for those of you who actually pointed out and said, hey, either that this is not okay, or this got me really thinking that maybe this wasn't appropriate. And I really appreciate that you actually flagged, that you actually mentioned that, hey, this is something, Risto, you need to look at again. And you need to think twice. So sincerely, thanks to all of you who pointed that out. And like I said, this is, and many of you also, although the few of you pointed out that, this course is about sensitivity lenses and the importance and meaning of individual words. So point proven, to say the least. And I'm, of course, more than happy to discuss further. And if you want to make any points, then I would suggest that not using this lecture for that, but afterwards and everything, just point out either in the feedback or anything. So about that. Good. Then looking at your exercise number 5, what happened over there? So reflections and learnings from it. And again, excellent things I picked out from your submissions. And a couple of points I'm sure that resonate with you, especially at this stage of the whole course. Somebody really pointed out that doing the facilitation exercise, so the exercise was how to facilitate a workshop for the other person. How do you know if that was a successful facilitation? That's a really good point. And that's a really good reflective point. How do I know that my facilitation is successful? And somebody else pointed out that, what are the tangible outcomes of a successful facilitation? Yes, definitely a good question. Because the facilitation is kind of a mediator. It is something that helps to achieve something else. So the facilitation as such doesn't necessarily produce anything. The facilitation is there to produce something else. So the success is typically reflected in the something else that was facilitated. And I really liked also this comment that I was really impressed by my partner's ability to ask questions in a very, very detailed manner to ensure accuracy. So at least to me, this sounded that whoever the partner was, they had really understood the whole point of the exercise is to, it's kind of easy as a facilitator, just make sure that you really understand what's going on and the other person is telling you, because that's a really great way of helping the other person to clarify their thoughts, helping the other person to prioritize, helping the other person to understand what is valuable in this and what it necessarily isn't. And you have to go to a certain level of details to do that. However, I added this quote next, that somebody said that in their exercise, they were happy that they did not feel threatened by somebody offering their wisdom or giving advice. And to me, this quotation was a really excellent example that this pair had been very successful in creating an atmosphere of certain safety. That it is safe for the other person to give advice, and it's really safe to, to accept that advice, to be open, and maybe even show some sort of vulnerability in this context. And it goes back to the previous one, is that, that the atmosphere, the feeling of the situation is such that somebody can go and ask very detailed questions and, show their lack of knowledge in things, for example. And this, I hope, at this stage is kind of obvious when it comes to almost whatever kind of facilitation and work, is that the preparation is the key. And many of the exercises we have done, or pretty much all of the exercises and the reflection, just shows that, understanding the context, the preparation, and having a checklist of questions to answer is very valuable. And this was an important thing also I picked up. Being a facilitator, I still find it difficult not to pitch in my own thoughts and opinions. I'm going to get back to that in a couple of slides, because I think that in some situations, you should give your opinions. For example, look at the quote number 3 there in the middle. The other person actually appreciated somebody giving their opinions and thoughts. So it's not either or. Nevertheless, the point of the exercise, and I was happy to see in the ones that I went through, was that maybe this helped you to understand what is your role in different situations. And the fact that as a facilitator, your role might change. That in this pair exercise, this was my role. But when I go to work and there's my team, my role is a little bit different. But being very conscious of those roles. What's your angle? What's your perspective into things? That's the other question. And then, of course, what are your techniques? Are you the one who keeps asking those very detailed questions? Is that your technique? Do you play dumb or ask silly questions? That's kind of often my technique, is like, okay, can I ask a very stupid question? And then it kind of maybe gives the atmosphere a certain, openness, that everybody can be stupid and ask silly questions and be not that knowledgeable. So that's another technique, which all kind of adds up. But what's your style? What kind of a person are you? What are your personal strengths? And how do you build your facilitation on top of that? Because obviously the facilitation is a very much human-to-human exercise, whether it's one-to-one or one-to-many. So, and there's certain authenticity, there's certain rapport that you want to build, trust, everything to the people you're working with. So it actually goes into very personal stuff, and being authentic becomes important for other people to accept maybe your facilitation. So kind of emphasizing this last exercise that you did, a couple of things that I want to really highlight here. That there's a difference between how to plan a workshop and how to facilitate the planning of a workshop. So this is what we had a week or 2 weeks ago, that the role of a facilitator is not to give the answers. The role of the facilitator is to help the other person to have the answers. That's the midwife perspective. So here's the kind of the same thing. It's a different kind of a role to help plan a workshop than to actually plan the workshop. And now you got to try both side by side. And this is back to the quotation over there, expert giving advice. Are you more of a coach? He meaning here that the coach kind of has, it kind of assumes that the coach actually has a lot of knowledge and wisdom, or is your role more of a neutral facilitator? It's like, I don't know anything about this, but I'm here to facilitate this. And this is what Jari, you have been mentioned, that you have been training actually lately, is especially in a crisis or, argument situations where you need a neutral facilitator or negotiator, then you probably don't give your wisdoms. You're trying to help these people meet each other somewhere to facilitate the thing. So it depends, like I put there in the footnote. It depends very much on the situation and the role. And the role depends, of course, on the ownership of the situation or the thing being facilitated, who's making decisions, what kind of power structures are there. And goes back to the sensitivity. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
But, I think it's just very being aware of this role, and of course the temptation, because we tend to have good ideas, and of course when we talk about some substantial expertise and so on, that we have knowledge about that, of course it's a bit unfair to withhold that. But how we give the knowledge, it can be that if we just take an expert role suddenly, that okay, this is the right way to do it, then we maybe drop out a bit of the role that we should help the others to make sense. But then if we give the kind of, okay, I have this expertise in this, what do you think about this? And so we can give our knowledge as a resource to the process, but not taking a kind of authoritative role. But of course, it depends also this ownership, decision-making power, and so on. But I think this is one thing we should be reflexive or knowledgeable about or aware of. And so, and different situation, it a little bit depends, and being sensitive with that.
And I really like that technique that you used, that you talked about this earlier as well. Is kind of like, this is not my opinion, but sometimes I use, like, for example, I worked with a company and they did this. Or, for example, somebody else might ask this question. Then you kind of bring it, like you said, as a resource to the table, and not necessarily as somebody's personal opinion. So it's detached from a person. And sometimes we are in situations where you actually, the opinion has to stand alone to be critically assessed and so forth. And then this actually also, the third one over here, came up in some of your reflections. That did you focus on actually the workshop, what happens during it, or how much did you focus on the before and the after parts of it, the kind of the wrapping around it? And then the fourth one, again, emphasizing that once you are a facilitator, it's always a good exercise to think about, or sometimes go to the other side, being facilitated. What does it feel like? And personally, I enjoy a lot the situations where I'm in the audience, I'm being facilitated. And of course, trying to do my best to be really good. I have so much kind of empathy for the facilitator. I'm like, okay, how do I behave my best? Am I active? What should I do? And how do I make the facilitators work really easy? So it's a nice exercise for those of you who are in some kind of a facilitating role, either as a supervisor or a workshop professional. Just sometimes just try out how does it feel to be on the other side of the table. And then the last slide about wrapping up last week's exercise. These are probably the kind of the big questions that you need to be aware of. And maybe, you know, maybe this is a checklist to check every time you kind of start a new role in a facilitator, or even in the middle of a certain role. How do you balance between your expertise and these? This is something we just talked about. What about the different agendas? This is something we talked about earlier in the lectures, that is there such a thing as a neutral facilitator? Doesn't everybody have some kind of an agenda? Yeah, most probably people do have some kind of agenda, everybody has. How do we balance between different agendas? Opinions, their opinions, your techniques and tools, and their techniques and tools. And by this, I mean, you know, you might be familiar with certain techniques, you might be familiar with certain tools, but the audience might be familiar with certain techniques and tools, and you know, you need to speak their language. If they're really happy at brainstorming, then, you know, you might have to brainstorm with them or something like that. And then, of course, the personality question is this is why we need open and, you know, we need atmospheres that have certain acceptance, that we accept that, you know, that's how they are. That's their personality. And there might be, like I said, there might be very difficult situations for you as a facilitator. But maybe some person, it's not necessarily their personality, but maybe their opinions are such that you just, you know, you cannot accept them. They are not right. And then as a facilitator, you need to make judgments of what do you do about it? How much do you know? Do you look at the big picture? That should I, you know, how much should I go and change these things without breaking the atmosphere, or and so forth? These are the difficult things that we need to face as facilitators. When is a situation such that some prejudice is just not okay, that we need to stop it, even if it risks kind of breaking the workshop or breaking the atmosphere of it? And I'm sure that there many of you have been in such a situation that you need to make a call. I guess one, you know, obvious example is that if there's a person in that, let's say in a workshop or in a training, that they are not really proactive, that they are holding back with their attitudes, with their opinions, or for some other reason. Are you going to be, as a facilitator, do you need to pull them aside and say, hey, sorry, but you have an attitude problem and we need to talk about it? Those are difficult situations, especially if you're, you know, you're a hired outsider who's being paid to facilitate, that suddenly you're kind of taking charge of the situation. You're maybe taking charge of the client and telling them that, you know, that's not appropriate, or you're not really helping me, or you're not helping this whole, you know, the big long-term goal that we're trying to do. Mike is asking me, how did I handle the person? Yeah, that's a really good question, Mikey. I actually thought about it a little bit. And well, to be honest with you, the situation, and I was very conscious of it, we were about 20 people and 19 men between the age of 35 and 55. And there was only one woman in the whole group. And I was very conscious of this from the very beginning, that this was a very, very manly group of executives and directors. And yeah, I did not flag that comment then. I just kind of let it go, that if this is, I don't remember, but I guess my judgment at that stage was that, okay, you know what? I didn't want to pinpoint for the one woman in the group of 20. You know, I'm not an expert on this, but I mean, it's a difficult situation. You know, ideally, I would have liked to ask the only woman in the room, how did you feel, and should I do something about it, and kind of get their opinion about it. But at that stage, I kind of let it go because for that person, it seemed a way of, communicating in an indirect way that this training was very useful for him. I hope that's giving you some kind of idea that it was a very complex situation. Jari, do you want to add something?
Yes, it's always a kind of tricky situation, but sometimes it can happen also that someone want to somehow start to define what's going on, what's happening, and try to steal take kind of power stance and try to define what's right way or so on, or what's the right way to discuss or call things. And in that way, it's good to not just starting to argue with one person about that, but then, okay, this is a good point that you raised, but then let's talk about that a bit, and involving all others as well. What's their view to give more kind of multivocal vocality in place, so that it's always keeping the all included, involved the situation. And it can sometimes involve also the words we are using. What's the right way of talking and calling things, and in our organization and in this workshop. And sometimes we can also make some house rules in the beginning to about the words we're using and so on, if there is some sensitivity, that then we can also then evaluate if somebody is using such words that are not inclusive, for example. Then we can pinpoint that. Okay, you mean that? How about what do you think about that word? How inclusive is it? And so that's one way to be prepared for that. But that's also how sensitive, how we know the context, what kind of group we are having, and what's the situation we are talking about, and what are the personalities and possible risk that there is this kind of spillover in a way. But it's, of course, we should take care that it's a safe environment for everybody to work and participate. And that way, the violent talk or this kind of bullying or something like that is always, we have to be aware and take care of that it's not happening. But
also, I remember I've been in a very different kind of situations, or in a very similar, being a facilitator or the head coach. And then I can't remember how it started, but it was a very manly, technical company, very male-dominant company. And somehow the handful of women in the group of 20-25, they started talking about this issue and the problem of, the problems of being a very male-dominant company. And it was just, that turned out really well. They finally kind of had suddenly an environment where they could really say things aloud, and many of the men there were actually quite surprised. And to be honest, some of the men just went outside because they thought that this was too much information for them. And that we kind of discussed it in the context of, everybody wants to be very innovative and creative. So, do you feel like that your company has problems when it comes to gender and kind of prejudice and structural hindrances and so forth? So, yeah. Okay, and to wrap this up and stay in the schedule, although now we're started going into interesting territory. So I really liked this quote that one of you had, that understanding that when is the facilitation successful? What is your role as a facilitator? Then one of you actually wrote that, ask, what does the other person need from the facilitation? What do you need from me? How can I be helpful? How do you see my role? And then you start a negotiation process. Okay, yeah, I can help you there. And back and forth. So what would you think that would be a good goal? So kind of calibrating the objectives of an individual facilitation in some way. Because we are different persons, we have different styles and strengths, and being able to, what are you expecting of me? Having that conversation kind of continuously with other people in a way, but also in a situation-based. So let's go into wrapping things up for this course. So what were the aims for this course? What were objectives? And definitely what was your own individual experience? And I just copy pasted the slides we had in the very first lecture. So we had two objectives. So one was really about you and helping you, showing you the fundamental changes in thinking about leadership, organization, and strategic change. And also wanting to demonstrate together with you that this is also very practical. It's not just books and theory, but it's hands-on work. So this was our first objective. And the second one was actually related to the other people, you and the other people, to leverage this crowd and kind of forcing you to listen and talk and facilitate. That's what the exercises were all about, and the breakout rooms as well. And then kind of facilitate your learning by providing materials and links and tools and thinking and give you something that you can take immediately into use in the exercises, but hopefully also immediately into use in your everyday work and your studies. Most of you are still students. So those were the themes, as you well know. And these were the exercises, just to remind you. So we first start with the static context, understanding the context with the onion exercise, and then understanding the temporal context, where do we come from, and what's the long-term goal, what are we aiming at, and then thinking about the current situation. We had the dumb goals of clarifying, helping you to clarify what are good objectives, how should we write them down. Then 2 weeks ago, we had the listening and reflection, that you were actually reflecting yourself about the experience for the course and practicing that. How do you listen to the other person and facilitate? And then the final exercise was a facilitation exercise of an individual workshop, coaching a workshop, helping the other person to plan a really good workshop. So soon we're gonna divide you into breakout groups, and we're gonna do it like we did few weeks ago, that we're going to throw you into those rooms, but don't start talking immediately. Take a few minutes and everybody kind of, memorize what was meaningful for you. Now that you look back at these lectures and this course, what was meaningful for you? What was important for you? What are your key takeaways? And then after, reflecting on that a little, then start the conversation together. Then start talking together of sharing your experiences, what was meaningful, what are your key takeaways. And then when we bring you back, then we are super happy if we can get your bullet points again into the chat. So are we ready? And we're going to give you a relatively good time to do this. So there's no hurry. Enjoy your each other, I guess. So just to let you know, I guess we are ending with a few minutes over 5. So I guess 6 minutes to go.
Yes.
Actually, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, when there's people around here, it would be nice to hear about your views. What was important and meaningful, and what are your takeaways? Anybody wanting to share?
Hi, yeah, I can share. Sorry, I didn't join the breakout rooms. I've had a hectic day at work, so I wasn't able to join them. But I think one of the biggest and nicest things that I've got from this course has been, well, I think the lectures have been excellent. And I think it's also been great that the pair assignments have been with, people that are or have already been working for a longer time or are already working, as compared to personally not having as much work experience since my studies are still incomplete. So I think that's been super nice. And also, just talking to other people, even if it is via Zoom, but these kind of interactions with new people have been decreased so much by the pandemic that it's been nice to, meet new people via video.
Okay, thank you. That's great to hear that this has offered the platform and forum and stage for that. Okay.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else willing to say something about the experience? I know that Vera here on my left side is very active on my previous course, but anybody, would you like to say something? Are you there?
Yeah, I can quickly thank you all as well for a great course. Okay. I cannot join the breakout room right now because I'm running on errand, but I'm trying to listen in on what is going on and see the slides afterwards, as I'm a family person, so time is on the card, so to speak. But yeah, overall the course has been really great, and I have enjoyed the experience of kind of reviewing the facilitation situation from a different perspective. I do it like pretty often in the work environment. I have to kind of facilitate workshops and do webinars and so forth, but actually to get those practical tools and to test them out in a pair assignment, that has been really eye-opening, because kind of forced me outside to have that outsider's perspective, so to speak. And I think that has been really, really valuable for me as a professional and as well as a student, because I kind of juggle both roles at some point. Thank you all.
Okay, Christina, that's very, very nice to hear, because we have been worrying about if there's so experienced people here, do we have anything to offer? And it's nice to hear that you have gained some benefits and new stuff. Yeah, great, thank you. Someone else, or do we have still time?
Yeah, we have. I think Lee and I agreed 17:03 is
Okay. Well, there's time for
the callback.
So anybody wanting to share your takeaways or talk about the experience?
Yes, hello.
Melanie.
I would happily share a few words if possible.
Okay, please.
My name is Ina Manko. This course actually confirmed how much I do not know. I'm not necessarily involved in facilitating change processes a lot. I was more often on the other side, being facilitated. Organizations went through a number of change kind of situations. So it was interesting to see it from the sort of the other side of the moon. And obviously there is a lot to learn. So thank you very much for such an interesting course.
Okay, thank you. Great to hear.
There we go. I can see numbers rolling. So
okay, people are coming back.
30 seconds to go. 35. One thing that got me actually thinking that maybe some of you want to comment aloud or maybe write in the chat is that many of the students have said that it's really nice to do the exercises with professionals already out there working. But how about the other way around? Any of you seasoned professionals, what did you get out of the working with students? How does it, any benefits there? Any views, comments?
Well, I think I've been working for something like more than 21 years already in work life, and I think it was maybe the best part of the course was the exercises. Of course, the lectures were good also than the material, but I think the best thing was to meet with total strangers and coming from so different situations in life and in general, but we shared the mutual interest and could share some thoughts. So I think that was the most amazing part, really. I really liked it.
Yeah, really good to hear. Those were our hopes. One of our many hopes, I guess. But hey, now that you're all back, writing all that, finished, let's have an official break because those of you who were in the breakout rooms, you need a breather. You just had a social conversation. You need to take a break and then we'll continue. So we